You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Welcome back to RXD Radio. This is James Thayer, and I have a guest, Jorge De Hoyos, joining me today. We want to jump on and kind of talk through, in conversations that we were having, was the different pathways in the fitness industry that people can find themselves in, some being more traditional, some being non-traditional, that anyone in the industry maybe isn't as aware of or don't find themselves in, kind of starting there and maybe transitioning to different parts of the industry that both of us have been exposed to, that we've worked in, or just have preferences towards. So from our discussion earlier, one route into fitness I don't think gets as much exposure, as much discussion, that both of us have dabbled in a little bit, would be corporate wellness. So anybody unfamiliar with corporate wellness, this is essentially running a wellness, fitness, health program service for a corporation. Sometimes that's going to look at in a headquarters location or a central location, or it's going to be more kind of a la carte, offering services or programs or challenges or events outside of that corporate setting. So this is a route I know in Campus Rec that will find quite a few of people in that industry making that transition over to the corporate field. One, sometimes the pay and benefits are better and more alluring that way. Another reason that, at least from my perspective, that I've seen is people like going in and having that opportunity and that autonomy where they can expand outside of their personal training role that a lot of fitness people start with, either starting with, in a group fitness setting or starting in a personal training setting where you're working one-on-one or maybe with small groups. But what the corporate setting can offer sometimes is expanding that out past just the one-on-ones. Oftentimes, especially if they have a gym location, we'll see quite a bit of that one-on-one working within the gym area that they have, kind of maintaining that. But what we'll see sometimes is them setting up events, challenges. Sometimes it's education based that people will come in. Sometimes it's challenges to trying to get people more active, more moving, more conscious of their health. So with you having dabbled in the corporate side of fitness and wellness a little bit, first I'll kind of ask what allured you to that, or what even created that exposure, since sometimes people just fall into it and it's not necessarily like a career path that gets a lot of views or gets shared quite a bit, but it is a whole industry in fitness that's out there and available.
Yeah, I think that most of us that kind of like go into the world of being some sort of fitness professional start off just like, we like the concept, we like training ourselves, we start to get deeper, and eventually we find ourselves being able to either teach or help other people on the way. And again, like corporate wellness is usually not something that comes to mind right away. And like I started working at a big box gym, right, as most of us do, and just being exposed to that, and eventually just fell into like a bunch of people that were into like the world of aesthetics, started to reach out. So I was like going to that route, and then I would a lot of people that were in some team sports started to reach out, so I started going to that route. And through all this time, like corporate wellness was never something that crossed my mind. And as many things in like my career and in life in general, it was not something that I sought out. It's more so like something that I stumbled upon by just kind of like knowing the right people and being friends with them and having worked with them in the past as in a one-on-one setting. These close friends of mine have their own company. Eventually, they reached out and they were talking about me being able to help some of like their top producers in the company to be able to not just kind of like the whole, hey, let's get jacked, but like these guys understand that, hey, there's a whole other performance side of things when it comes to like in your job, if you can be, whether it be like around nutrition or supplementation or even training, to be able to help them perform at their job, that they understood, and they wanted me to kind of use what I've worked with them and implement it with some of their guys and start to enhance not just like their personal life and their work life and everything that we know that fitness can do for a person, right? So that was kind of how I stumbled upon that. In my case right now, it's not like I don't operate out of a headquarters. It's more so like kind of like you mentioned, like an a la carte thing. And work with some of their guys, work with what goals they have, their situations, and whatever they're looking for. But I know that there are many different ways that and avenues that trainers or coaches can pursue when going down corporate wellness that it may look completely different on one way or the other, right? Like anything from like group settings to one-on-one to like online modalities, or even in the goals that are being pursued by these people. Like a lot of, I know that some people in corporate wellness are hiring on just like, hey, just help my people perform better, right, at their job. And some people have like extra incentives and like they just value the ability of their either employees or any people on their team to be able to, I don't know, find fulfillment in other areas of their life. So like whatever their goal is, like if they want to run a marathon or just want to be stronger or whatever, they want to offer that as a service to them. So it's something that I'm kind of new to right now, and it's been interesting to just kind of like explore this new avenue and see what's available and see the opportunities that can present each other. But it's really interesting right now because the people that I work with are, I mean, as I mentioned, like a lot of like high performance in the company, right? So it's interesting to see the parallels on how they approach their job and their life and how they approach their like the fitness portion of their life, right? How they approach their goals, how they approach, I don't know, any challenges or adversity that may come their way. And it's just on when we talk about like the coaching side of things, not so much the programming side, and we talk about the personal level of interacting with people, it's good to be able to see these connections and understand like, hey, whatever makes these people good at their job is what makes them being able to reach their goals in like fitness as well, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's a very unique setting in corporate wellness because it is a whole nother incentive brought into the dynamic of training because there's an insurance incentive that comes into play that a lot of companies, are paying a premium or have a payout based on what your health evaluation is with your insurance. That
Yeah.
not only can you look time and time again on the statistics that, generally happier, healthier people cost companies less money in the way of medications, in the way of sick days or time out, lost work. Another one, like looking at low back injuries, like just the time that people are out in a corporate setting due to like low back injuries and time away from work, that they do try to incentivize healthy habits and, not smoking, getting your blood work or health screen in annually, that they'll put a premium to it. Sometimes they'll, depending on the corporation, they'll put rewards to it as far as incentives like that you'll win certain prizes, or if you do this many challenges or earn this many points, like they add sometimes even bonuses. But there is this whole other aspect and incentive in corporate wellness that is a little bit different than working in a commercial gym with Gym Pop, that are interested in, in improving their health and achieving their goals. But it does create a little bit different dynamic or a unique dynamic from that corporate setting, that it is being incentivized through the company. It is being incentivized through insurance a lot of time, and something that you brought up that I'd be interested to hear how you navigate is being able to relay or being able to identify their performance in their job and how this can benefit that, how it can help them improve or coincide with that performance by looking at health, looking at fitness through that realm. That the whole offset or offshoot of it is, let's look at how you're performing here at work and how can we couple that with behavior change or healthy habits. So whenever you are working with an individual in that setting, how do you go about making that pairing or kind of getting perspective or sharing perspective, how this can help improve on the business side?
Yeah, I think that that's where like a lot of like the art of coaching comes in, because it's hard to look at KPIs from their job and say like what I'm doing has a direct like positive or negative response on their KPIs, and how much is just them getting better at their job, right? But that's where I think that a lot of the subjective portions may come in, and like understanding how to have conversations with people, and understanding that there are things that you can still measure within an individual. And this not just applies to like corporate wellness, it applies to like any type of client that you want. But like if you can have any metrics that you can take in a more subjective manner that can be indicators of performance, whether it be like at the gym or in their life or in their job, anything from like, can we talk about biofeedback? Can we talk about I mean, when we go into biofeedback, like how can we track like energy level through the day? And it doesn't have to like require any like device or wearable, right? It could just be like simple questions. Or can we identify if their focus is good or not, or like is it changing through the day? Things like mood, like all these are biofeedback markers that we can look into and start to see that we may have to make some changes around like training or nutrition or whatever that we want to do. And paired with that, just like talking to people and like understanding their what kind of habits they have in their life. You know, like the part of coaching that sometimes doesn't get talked about as much, but I feel like can give you such like a window to look into the other aspects that we sometimes miss. Like, hey, maybe this person has a job, and like a guy that I'm working with like just had a baby. How does that impact? How much of a role is a workout on like lack of recovery, and how much is it just like his newborn not being able to sleep properly, right? So I think that the real response to this is if we can identify different metrics that we can track. And again, like biofeedback is something that I use kind of like across the board with my clients, but a lot of them are just like individual metrics that I've found with each individual that, or each person, may I say, that can allow me to like, I know for, I don't know, this specific person that I work with, this is something that matters to them, and they've identified that this tends to like change or go up and down. And I think like the same way we always talk like performance is a proxy for how we do things in the gym, this applies to like every aspect of their life. And if we can start to see like upward or downward trends, then this allows us to make some changes. And something that this has taught me like a big lesson that I carry over to my other clients now, is that being so involved on the work side of things with them now allows me to realize that as coaches, we sometimes are like oblivious to the fact that people have lives outside of our relationship with them, right? Or like maybe not oblivious, but like we're not fully aware of everything else that's happening in their lives. And we tend to think that like, oh, I'm just giving them like 3 things to do in a day. It shouldn't be that hard, you know, like, oh, like I designed this perfect workout and it has to go according to plan. But like working with these people and like actually being able to see, not just like seeing a message like, hey, I had to travel so I couldn't hit the workout, but like being able to like, hey, I got to be here for this event. I got to be here for whatever's going to happen, and understanding like, hey, this is the gym that I'm at. What can I do? Understanding that a lot of the times the flexibility that we can grant them to be able to still trend on track while not hitting 100% of what we intended for them to hit at the beginning is something that I've carried over to my other clients, where it's like, hey, like I know this is what I'm talking about. I know that life happens, and I know you have a million other relationships than the one you have with me as a coach client. So starting to introduce like certain degree of like acceptable flexibility that will still allow them to get like stay on track for their goals, but can allow like for actual higher level of compliance as things may be thrown their way.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective, and definitely something that like if coaches can incorporate successfully, it's going to help their clients achieve success long term and have that flexibility and adaptability where it's not so black and white of either you did it to 100% or you didn't at all, and more so of what's the amount or what's the percent that we can achieve, and where's those acceptable ranges of trying to achieve that. If we complete these 3 things, hey, this is ideal and perfect, but we're not working or operating in a perfect environment when you're having to travel, when maybe you have a newborn, whenever maybe it's the end of the quarter and you're trying to hit your numbers. So hours are much longer, stress is much higher, the recoverability is going to be lower, but being able to recognize that and being able to, as a coach, kind of adapt based on the outside factors that are going on, not seeing it just as, I'm training somebody in the gym and like the gym is the only consideration for them getting or showing progress or being able to improve, but really those outside factors, because they're going to have such a play on the dynamic of one, this person being able to progress long term, but also that person staying with you as a client. Because if you're a coach that is unable to adapt to somebody's lifestyle and you only keep this strict routine or expectation that it has to be 100% of this without figuring out what's going on in their life, without figuring out how you have to adapt as a coach to help them find success and create those behavior changes, that's very, very important to try to maintain clients and have them with you for the long term so they can actually see success, through those biomarkers of whether it's through insurance on their health screens, like they're seeing blood work and like heart rate, blood pressure steadily improving over time, or like just their perception of life at a given point. Like, are they happy? Are they unhappy? Do they feel more stressed, less stressed? Do they feel capable of doing things that maybe they didn't feel like they were capable of doing before? That could also bring about some, feelings of improving confidence, of independence. All these can be factors that if as a coach you can recognize and you can have those discussions and kind of find metrics to like help quantify that, that's important. But to your point, it needs to be on an individual basis. I'm sure there's some metrics that you're like, hey, I'd like these across the board because they're easy ones to track that I can get, but it's also your ability to individualize the things that you're trying to track over long term that might be unique to one person, not unique to the other. Again, if somebody has a newborn, hey, where can we get the acceptable ranges of sleep or how you're feeling to be able to take on the day, that we might have to adjust in a different or unique way for that individual opposed to somebody else that's, single and doesn't have all those outside obligations and can have more of a priority towards the gym. We're going to kind of handle that clientele basis differently because they do have unique situations that we can recognize as coaches.
Yeah, exactly. And something that I've realized is like people that are like high performers in any sense are used to like KPIs and like all these metrics that they have to hit, right? So something that I already did with my clients in the past, but this has helped me like take it to a whole new level, is like we don't need to wait until we hit like their initial goal to have them feel some sort of success, right? So a lot of the times that what we could do is just kind of like create like a client journey, and if we can structure it or frame it in a way where we can create wins along the way, especially in the beginning, if we can like create certain wins they can have really, really fast to get that level of buy-in and to get that level of like, I'm going to use this word loosely right now, but like motivation or just like a desire to keep going and understand like, hey, like I'm hitting these markers, I'm hitting these KPIs. It makes it a lot easier for them to follow along anything you're doing in the future, right? So just being able to outline like, hey, when this person is onboarded, how can I get a win within like day one? How can I get another win within like the first week? How can I get another win within like the first like 2 weeks, a month? And then obviously the timeline is going to be expanding as we go forward, but creating these wins and like setting up a framework where as soon as the client gets onboarded, you can have it set up so they start to hit these wins immediately and they're like more bought into the process and they can feel this sense of like not just accomplishment, but like a lot of times when in this scenario, like a lot of these wins are collective, right? Like this is like a corporate scenario, so like these people work with each other. So we have the opportunity to create this community, and some of like the wins are individual, some of the wins are collective. How can we create this momentum for that to keep going? And with even if it's not in the wellness setting, like with any type of client, if we have a good system and we understand like, okay, what happens from like I get a lead to like I get a new client to this client gets onboarded, and from like onboarding to like when we deliver whatever we're going to deliver, whether it be like a meal plan or a program or whatever, like how can I get a win in here and how can I get a win in the next week? That I feel like that is a very something that's either just glossed over or it happens, but it's not structured in a way where it's consistent enough to make it reproducible, like repeatedly with across clients, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a very important message for coaches to hear and reflect upon that can be applied in with any clientele that they're working with. But yeah, such an easy win to get for the coach that maybe isn't recognized as much or as prioritized as it should be, whenever it can really start laying the foundation and the basis for a successful dynamic or building rapport or building trust with clients in recognizing that. And that being creating wins early for the client and calling those out, helping them understand it, that for a coach, like recognizing that maybe our expectation is the client, hey, we have 2 sessions, like our very first week together, we have 2 sessions and they're there for the sessions ahead of time or they're not late. Like even something like that of taking those wins of, hey, I appreciate you getting here before time. You know, this really allows us to like start getting you ready for the workout, that we're not having to waste a ton of time, that I can start showing you warm up things that you can do on your own so you're ready to go right into the workout. Or recognizing like the small details, like if you're able to help correct a position or like help somebody feel better in your first session or 2, like take advantage of that. Make sure that not only are you identifying that, but don't let it be just internalized. Make that recognized through the client by, you know, pointing it out, helping them bring awareness to it. If it is through a positional cue, you know, giving them that positive feedback of, hey, you got this. This is exactly what I'm looking for. Like, here's the positive feedback. Like, we found the cue that works. We're going to make sure that we're using this. We're going to make sure that we're working through this position that we just created, whether that, again, is just through a cue, whether that is through a physical constraint, whatever that is, but allowing us to recognize that, to be able to help the client identify that and sharing that success together. I think those are like very important development tools that aren't always used or aren't always recognized enough. So I'm glad you said that in being able to do it early, because it can completely change the dynamic of you working with that client, and it's an easy win. And in coaching, we know like you should take the easy wins when they're there, because there's going to be some hard ones to get. And in our industry, it is that long-term approach of, hey, you know, what's our goal in 6 months? What's our goal in a year with some of the clientele that you work with on the physique side, on the performance side. Like those are long-term goals that we're looking at trying to find success in, that sometimes is lost in the day-to-day, that, you know, we're not going to see the end result of this for, you know, for some of the performance side, not till they're actually performing in season. Or if it's a performance-based client where they're coming back from an injury, or we're trying to reduce the potential of continued injuries, like our success is at the end of the season that you didn't get injured, that you were able to make it through the season. But that, for some sports, that's going to be 3-4 months that we can't see the reality of that in full. For some of the physique competitors, depending on to what level they're working and what their goals are, for some of them, 6 months, a year, 18 months out, that you're trying to work to achieve some of those long-term goals. So anytime we can find that short-term success with the client, be able to recognize it for ourselves, because I think as trainers, like, we get very hyper focused on like the long term and trying to achieve this and trying to get it close to perfect, that it could be beneficial for ourselves to recognize that and call it out, but also important to help the client recognize those small successes for those long-term successes, because it's going to be setting it up, and it's going to help that dynamic of the client coach relationship in being able to share those wins, because sometimes that sharing of the wins isn't recognized enough or quick enough. So find those wins and take advantage of those wins whenever you can. I think that's an important message that you put out for coaches there.
Yeah, and I think that there's like that is where the big like history intake can also play to your benefit in a huge way, because if you have a good history intake going into whatever the session or the initial version of the plan that you're going to propose, or whatever first interaction you're going to have with them taking some sort of action towards the goal, if you have a good history taking, it allows you to frame the situation in a way where you're setting them up to succeed, right? If there's a lack, like a poor history intake before that, whether it be like injury, or whether it be like preferences, or whatever it may be around the individual, where it can allow you to shape the situation in a way that's going to be favorable for them to succeed, that is something that's worth paying a lot of attention into, right? So I feel like a lot of coaches do that in like a very lazy job in history intake, and just like checking off the boxes. Like, I'm just going to make sure that like no major injuries and just clear to train. But like, you're leaving out like the low hanging fruit is right there. Like, just take it and like ask a couple questions. What do you like? What do you not like? Is there anything in the past that has worked, that has not worked? And then going a little deeper, other than the obvious questions that need to be asked, can allow yourself to right off the bat like set up in a way where that win is going to be really, really easy. And I feel like even in like, I mean, we were working with professional athletes a couple days ago. Like, even with people like this, like allowing to see in depth into like their personality, and I don't know, like injuries that they may have had in the past, allows you to, if the first session you go into the athlete, you give them an exercise that they don't really, really like, or like, I don't know, they're recovering from an injury, and this may be the ideal progression to go through, but like they're going to have to fail a couple times before they nail it. And that frustration can build up, and then you lose the trust with the player, and then you can't move forward to the following sessions. Maybe you just give them like an easy like throw right there, and then they just can hit it out of the park. And now, even if it wasn't the ideal thing to do or optimal thing to do according to like biomechanics or whatever we want to look into it, it gets you enough buy-in to where now you can do the things that you actually need to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Your ability to kind of to sprinkle in the things that you need to do and the things that they want to do, is there is artistry in that, and recognizing whenever an exercise just isn't working for whatever reason that day, that being able to call an audible and change it up to find something, even if it is, lower hanging fruit, even if it is a softball across, like a slow pitch across the plate, that there is purpose and advantage to that. And as a coach, if you can recognize that in the session, it's not only going to allow you to find the successes in that session, but it's going to allow you to like recognize with that individual on a deeper level. Like, you start to get some personality traits with it. You start to recognize, okay, like they're getting really frustrated with this. This is more detrimental now to this session and to our relationship to try to keep this in than just scrap it, or just, again, transition to something else that, based on how they're performing. If, as you said, like working with a couple athletes, like if you saw energy levels starting to drop and like there's some complexity, some of the exercise that they're, just not going to get or going to perform well. And okay, we're just going to change it a little bit. We don't have to set the standard that it has to be this exercise in this order, black and gray, and we have to complete it no matter what. There's some autonomy in that to be able to downregulate, or if they're giving you a positive response, if they're, have that energy, if they're finding success, that we can upregulate it. Perfect example, like we were going back and forth between safety squat bar and a 2-to-1 jumping from 2, landing on 1 box jump. And I know, like, in my session going through that, like, first off, we were in a group, so they wanted to compete against each other, so that helped the dynamic a little bit. But also, based on how they were performing with it, we could look at, okay, we have the option to go a little bit higher, to like challenge this a little bit more, or we can change the dynamic where it's a bit faster paced to try to encourage a little bit more of that competitive nature that we can utilize to make this an enjoyable session, still working within the realm of like, hey, let's operate safely. Let's make sure like the positions that they're landing in, like we don't want to just automatically increase a like riskier position or like add additional stress just to do it. But where we can recognize the potential to like take advantage of this energy, of the mentality, to upregulate, or on the other side of it, to downregulate, to help the experience of that athlete or of that group in that session.
Yeah, and this is taking a bit of a left turn here, but the same way that like we talk about this like ability of coaches to be able to understand what's in front of them and adapt on the fly and put things into context in the same way. And this is why I say I'm going a little bit off route here.
I'm on the road with you.
Perfect. I feel like we have the same issue, like when we talk about social media and stuff, the same way that coaches need to have the ability to understand context when we're working with someone, and we may need to switch things up, even if like on paper this is the best thing to do, we maybe need to swap it up. When we're consuming information on the internet, a very similar scenario comes up where like I think most of these content I'm going to take that back. A lot of these content creators, I feel like, are saying things that are true and are valid within a certain context, right? Or like for a certain audience. And again, people may attract a certain audience because of the things they speak of, because of the way they speak. But someone completely foreign to that audience may just stumble upon a clip and take it to their own personal application when they don't really fit the niche of whatever topic was, like of the specific like population, the demographic that like piece of content was intended for, right? And then again, I'm talking about content as a form of education, just because it's kind of like the world we live in right now. But that ability to understand, like, hey, these things may be right, but like we just need to put things into context and understand that this may apply for some people, may not apply for other people. Or like we were saying, like in an ideal world, in a vacuum, this makes perfect sense. But the moment you have a human being in front of you, whether it be like, okay, this exercise perfectly aligns the line of pull to the fibers, but it takes 15 minutes to set up. Maybe we're not going to do it on the gym floor, or whatever superset, and the things are on the other side of the gym, or whatever thing we may come into, like the ability to put things into context as a coach and understand where things are applicable and not applicable is something that I find coaches that can nail that down tend to have higher level of thinking in other aspects of coaching, not just understanding and dissecting information.
Yeah, that adaptability, I think, speaks to the experience of a coach, like not just in the years that they've trained and worked with individuals, but it speaks to, as you said, like the thought process that goes into how they're coaching, how they're programming, how they train. But it probably also speaks to the diversity of environments that they've worked in before, and the clientele that they've worked with, that they understand the through lines on certain things, and they understand how there can be an ebb and flow to training, to these environments, that we can still get results even if it's not the exact plan that we have, because we understand this like principle based approach, how we can, which allows us to make these quick transitions, that it allows us to be thoughtful in what we're doing and how we can adjust on the fly. And basically it doesn't fall apart from that, but we're able to keep a session going, because I think that's where some exposure can come in, where people, or like content creators that maybe are creating content that there might be some education to it, but that's lacking in real world experience in being able to provide like the context to it. As you were saying, it might be something as simple as like, well, in reality, I probably wouldn't do this superset, because like going from a rack all the way across the gym to use this other piece of equipment that most people train in high traffic times, and you're going to lose one, if not both of those pieces of equipment. So for that, that setting, it might be, hey, in an ideal world, or even being able to relay the context of it, of in an ideal world, we'd want this exercise and this exercise paired together, but you have to understand that's not always going to be an option. So sometimes here's something that we can couple with it that might make more sense, or might be more available in this location or this area, than having to traverse the whole gym floor, going back and forth, trying to pair these things up to make them the most ideal. Or that you're not going to be that person that has 5 different sets of dumbbells all spaced out in a squat rack, not even using the barbell in it, but you just needed the space, like, because nobody wants to be that person. But without the context, there's sometimes that loss of awareness in a gym environment of like, oh, I'm being that person right now. I'm the person that, everybody hates to see in the gym, or like is just the person that's causing the problems here, because I'm unaware of the culture. I'm unaware of the environment going on around me. Now, I do want to kind of ask, because as you mentioned before, like you've been in a lot of settings. You have experience with a lot of different clientele, whether that is Gen Pop, whether that is physique, whether that's more performance based. As a coach, how have you been able to kind of take your experience and transition it into these different mediums? I think this is an aspect that a lot of coaches kind of battle with, or find a challenge in their career, that they might find a starting place, whether that is corporate wellness, whether that is a commercial gym, or working with athletes, that they might find themselves in this setting, but not necessarily understand how they can take this experience and apply it to a different population, that they're not kind of pigeonholed into this one group, but they have the potential to be able to expand out and train different groups. I think that's something that you've been able to, at least from my perspective, been able to seamlessly do, even if it doesn't feel like that. But clearly you've been able to capitalize on your experience and allow that not to hold you just to one group, but you've been able to adapt and adjust to allow you to move into these different spaces. So I guess my question is, like, how have you been able to navigate those spaces and make some of those transitions that would be helpful for coaches to think about, that maybe you're interested in working with different populations but haven't had that opportunity, or don't think they have experience to be able to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And when you say like don't have experience to be able to do that, like the first time you do the thing, you don't have experience for the thing you're doing, right? So it's always a fun like process, or like little moment of transition. But I think number one is understanding the demands of whatever field you're stepping into, right? And this may come with like a little like some level of background knowledge. Like if you're going to transition into like the world of like physique and aesthetics, like understanding the demands that come with this discipline and like the context and like personalities that may arise. If you're stepping into the world of performance, what are the demands that come with whatever the sports that you're going to be working with? Or like if you're working on the S&C side of things, what's your role in this whole like universe of like they have coaches and they have their sport and you're helping them perform in the sport. So what's your role and what's the demands of what you're doing? And even like the corporate wellness or like Gen Pop, like there's not a specific demand on some like aesthetic or performance metric per se, but there may be like maybe not demands, but maybe call it like non-negotiable things that need to still keep within their life that you need to account for as you go forward, right? So like number one, I would say like understand the demands or whatever field you're going to go into and understand them well, just so you can know where is it that I have to take this person and what are like the limitations that are going to be they're going to find in the way, or even like some of the roadblocks that I'm going to find across the way. And the other thing that I think is extremely important, and this is something that I mean, ever since I took the level one, and this like the shameless plug here for you guys to sign up for the course if you haven't for our next intake, is that we take a principle-based approach, right? So we don't teach a system, and I think that when I first started to get in, when I took the initial course, and now that I teach the course and I see other people come in, and they ask like, yeah, like what's the system? You know, like what are the steps that I follow when I get a client to be able to make the decisions that I need to make? And in reality, there is no system. The system is critical thinking, right? And if you can understand the principles well enough, the beauty about the principles is that the principles apply across the board, no matter what discipline you're applying it to, no matter what niche you're working in. The principles are the principles, and then all your job is if you understand the principles well enough, you can start to apply them just in different scenarios, and you may use different tools. And I think that's like the biggest thing that will change as someone gets more experience and more time under their belt and they're trying to improve themselves is the amount of tools at their disposal to achieve any of the things they want to achieve. But even if you're new at whatever you're doing and you don't have an extensive toolbox to draw from, if you understand the principles, you can always fall back on that and understand that whatever you do, if you stick to the things you know to be true, the decisions you make, if not perfect, they're at least going to be in the right direction. And the last thing that I think really, really helps is a great, just like network of people that, if ever needed, you could just reach out and talk to or ask questions or try to like insert yourself and understand how they operate. And this is something like I'm super grateful ever since I started to like work with you guys and everyone I've met through the company. It's just like there's so many people in so many different spaces that even if not asking direct questions, just like in passing conversations and different interactions that I've had, there are things that can be just like picked up. And eventually it does end up in like, hey, can we hop on a call? I want to talk about some stuff. And eventually it's just like, oh, I remember I saw Thayer doing so and so in the past, right? And that really helped me. So I think those are like the three things that really, really help, like understanding the demands of whatever niche you're going to step into, understanding the principles, and if you really, really want to have like the utmost confidence, having this network of people that, if needed, you can like turn to, and they'll help you out and they'll ask around. And I know that now this is my question for you. Like I know you work in a setting where you are exposed to a lot more coaches than I am, and like coaches, interns, and assistant coaches, and all these types of like roles in different parts of like the university. And we use the word like adaptability when it comes to coaching. What have you seen have been like what makes a coach adaptable or not, or what are the traits that you've seen in coaches that are able to adapt? Like, is it something that you've seen comes more with like longer they've been in the space, or just like a personal trait that they have, or kind of like I want your intake on what you've seen with people that have this ability to adapt to different scenarios.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. First off, the information you provided on like three things you notice, I think though like aspects of those directly would be part of my answer, but I'm not going to repeat what you said. So taking those as the basis. In my setting, what I would say would be another, to build upon what you've already stated, would be their willingness, like the willingness to continue to learn. That they're still staying in the game, they're still seeking out information. That might come in many forms. It might come from utilizing that network. It might come from staying up on courses or going to conferences, anything like that. But that adaptability, I think it's a willingness to continue to learn, to put yourself in a room and continue to put yourself in situations where you're trying new things, and then you can use that experience to figure out, okay, is this going to work with our program, with our team, or is it not? Because that's the other thing is I've seen it go a lot of ways. I've seen, coaches that have been in their setting for a decade plus, and like they've stopped learning. They're literally doing similar programs from where they started 10 years ago to what they're doing now. And they haven't really changed anything. They haven't looked to advance anything. That's not to say everything's wrong, because absolutely there's solid things that will remain and continue that we can build upon. But even some subtleties in understanding maybe the exercise that we choose, or understanding, like having a better understanding how this program can work with this sport in the practice of that sport, that we should be past the days where you walk into an S&C program and your football workouts look like your volleyball workouts, and your volleyball workouts look like your soccer workouts. Like, there's going to be some shared similarities of exercise that should continue through, that we can utilize, that are going to hold through to specific to performance-based training. But it shouldn't be a one-for-one looking the exact same. And kind of even past that point is this a coach that has the ability to individualize that program that they have the majority of people operating on? Like, if I walk in a weight room, is it okay, I'm going to see, hey, the bulk of the program is here, the team following it, but there's a couple individuals with prior injuries or certain histories that they're doing different things? Or are they just doing the same thing? Or even worse, is it where, hey, if you can't do this thing in the program, you're either not going to do the program, or we're losing exercise and we're losing opportunities to create that exposure and help develop that athlete to be, a more complete athlete, than just allowing for these glaring blind spots to continue to develop and allow the potential of future injuries to occur without that exposure. So on one, that's something I would look for going into a weight room or evaluating the program past just what's on paper. Is there some individualization, even if it's around a team's program, based on that individual's history, based on positional things? I think you bring up a good point with understanding the demands of the sport. Understand, is there higher injury rates for certain positions where they're going to need a little bit, they're going to need some different exercise for different positions, or to better constrain them to manage load, or to develop time in certain positions that maybe they have a higher likelihood of injury rates because of the demand of that position or the demand of the sport. So that'd be maybe how I would evaluate a program, of the adaptability of somebody continuing to learn and knowing how to apply things. If somebody knows well enough when not to just jump on the latest thing, where they're hey, I've I've seen this time and time again. Like, we're not doing this exercise, or like the majority of my players can't hold a certain pelvic orientation. So going through and doing Nordic curls for the majority of them isn't going to be beneficial in the long term. It could be detrimental. So just because I'm seeing a rise in this particular exercise, either in the industry or outside of the industry, or, this one program does it, thinking, hey, this is the answer, this is what I need to do, like really using that critical thought and evaluating if it's going to fit into the program that you've created for the team. What's the skill set of your team? This is another thing we can look at with like Olympic lifting. For a long time, that it was kind of a mainstay in programs, and it's used quite frequent, still used quite frequently in an exercise program. But my question would be, like, are you a good enough coach to teach this? Like, that's where my evaluation starts there with the coaches. Like, can you coach this well enough that the athletes can utilize this, where it's not just like the bar that we're moving? Because most sports that need that type of explosive dynamic, hey, we need some load on this, but we have to be technically proficient to effectively use this. Or is this a coach that recognizes that explosive quality that they want in a program, but they're not pigeonholed to what maybe the industry might teach, or what they might view as like, okay, I'm not a good enough coach to be teaching snatches and clean and jerks, and I don't have enough time with the athletes. Maybe I get 2 hours a week with them, and that's the stipulations of the NCAA, that I'm limited to this time. So maybe it is I'm going more box jumps, I'm going more med ball slams, I'm going more trap bar pulls, things like that, where that kind of shows the IQ of the coach of like, I understand the thing that I'm trying to achieve. This is how I'm going to utilize that. Or even better, if you can walk into a weight room and see, hey, this person's going through and doing a like hang snatch, this person's doing med ball slams, this person's doing box jumps, because they understand the quality that they're trying to achieve through the program. But then they've been able to individualize it based on the skill of their athletes and what they've seen. So all that to say, like, that'd be one aspect I'd look to, is the coach's ability to interpret information and be able to apply it to the program, but also be able to apply it on, or adapt it on, an individual basis. So it's not just everybody's doing the exact same thing, because there's going to be some disadvantages to certain individuals on the team, that some programs or some exercises aren't going to be as beneficial, or could even be as detrimental. Also looking at, like, is a coach taking the approach in consideration of recoverability in their program? Are they adapting their program based on what's going on in practice, or based on what's going on in the game? Or is it just, I'm running this across, this is the program we're running, I'm running it across because this is what it is? Or can they recognize, hey, I have this relationship with the coaches, I'm talking to them, I'm kind of getting feedback from them of how the players are performing. If this was let's say this was, the walkthrough day of shoulder pads, and we're just like helmets and shoulder pads, and we're just kind of jogging through, we're doing the walkthrough. Maybe I'm not going to send a high stress that day in the weight room, because we have a big opportunity here with the practice that it's setting the tone of recoverability. So let's look at, can we use our network? Can we have those conversations so we can be in sync with the practices and not offsetting it? So we're not looking at, having an intense practice one day, and then the very next day we're having an intense weight room session, and it's like, where's the recoverability for the athlete in that if we're just constantly hammering them through different vantage points of high intense, high intense, high intense, instead of let's, be mindful of where can we utilize and coincide with the different groups to help make more either when it needs to be a high stress, let's try to pair that together so we do have some greater potential for recovery the next day, or however we're timing that out. Also, are they recognizing the setting that they're in? If it is a university setting, are we looking at, hey, do we adapt whenever it's midterms? Do we adapt whenever we're around finals that are going to be high stress times, that it's going to be lower sleep? Are we shifting, and are we adapting? Are we taking the feedback from our athletes and using those type of metrics to adjust? That'd be another thing if they have that willingness to identify and recognize some of those trends to put into their program. Or again, is it simply just like, hey, I had the 12-week program laid out. I've been running this for 5 years and we haven't changed it at all. That'd be where I would recommend, hey, maybe we can go, like, let's audit. It doesn't mean we have to throw out the whole program and this is shit and you should never use it. It's like, okay, let's recognize, hey, what worked, what didn't, and where can we make change, or where can we just make this a better program based on more impactful information that we can take in if we're not already taking that in.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying about like not only understanding the impact that external factors can have within your program, but at the moment of being able to make those changes and not let it like the program be the program, even as good as the program may be, like you propose to change like, hey, switch like some sort of clean for like some sort of box jump, right?
Yeah.
And the key to be able to make those changes is understanding the intent of the program, or like the specific exercise or specific block that we're going through, and understanding like, hey, like if I want to produce some like high power movement through some sort of triple extension, I know the person may not have the skill to perform this with enough weight where it's going to like drive a significant adaptation, and then understanding that you can get a similar response by getting this like maximal effort, or like close to maximal effort, like box jump, where we're also getting that triple extension, right? But that change only happens if you're able to identify like, oh, this is not just about like a clean, or this is not just about the power movement. What are the properties that we're trying to like represent in this exercise? What is the adaptation that we're trying to drive, and how can we replicate this with something that will allow us to reap the benefits that we're trying to get, or that can exist within the constraints that we're operating? Or like you say, like taking the same idea of like understanding repercussions of things that happen outside and the intent that we have inside. Like if we had, I don't know, like the coach decided that we're going to do like max velocity drills on the field, man, we don't bring the athletes and go into like max power production on the gym, because they already did the thing. They got the adaptation on the field, right? So I was just trying to like go like a layer deeper, and like the only reason why these changes are able to be made is because the individual in charge of making these decisions not only understands the program or the external factors of the players or the people that are going to be performing the program, but also this person understands the intent that we're trying to drive with each of these pieces, right? And that allows for a lot of, whether it be changing or tweaking, or maybe the decision to stay the same when it's appropriate, that only happens if the intent is understood behind like each of the pieces of the program. Or how does this exercise fit within the session, or how does this session fit within the week, like the microcycle, or how does a week fit into like a, I don't know, like a 10-week off season that we need to ramp them up to a certain point before they can have certain capacity before they start their actual season of the sport they're going to be playing. So I feel like these are all important factors that need to be considered to be able to make these smart decisions and understand like we talked about, intent, context, external factors that can affect, whether it be like recoverability or their ability to perform.
Yeah, I think those are all great points and definitely something coaches can take away from this episode in understanding each of those points, but also to be able to utilize those is how you can seamlessly transition from one niche area of focus to another area of focus, because those those aspects, those dynamics at play is something that you should be pulling out in any setting with whichever clientele you're working with. And I think something that you've done very successful, like your representation of that in understanding all of those things, being able to set metrics to it, being able to quantify it, and being able to apply it across physique, across performance, across corporate wellness and general population. And that's why you've made yourself so adaptable to like any type of clientele or any niche industry or market that you're going into, because you understand it from that basis and that global perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I hope this kind of serves as a way for if anyone is like starting to get into a new niche or like already in their niche and just wants to like get a little better on it, can pull a little from these principles and understand that it's okay to like be new at something and not having the experience, but there are things you can have when you don't have the experience that can still allow you to make good decisions.
Absolutely. And I think we'll leave it there. I appreciate you coming on. It was awesome getting to talk with you, kind of share this perspective. And I think there's going to be a lot of takeaways for coaches from this.
And always good to talk to you. I'll see you soon.